So it's called the Framework for Mastery. And when I first started coaching, a colleague of mine said it was vision, plan, execute. It was this triangle, and we would draw this in any new client consultation. What's the vision? What's the plan? Now go execute. And I thought vision was important, but it was incomplete. I thought, we need clarity. Very like during a deployment, during a rugby game, what does success look like? So clarity's crystal clear. Now tell me about the purpose. So I get that this is important, but what's the purpose of that? What's the cause behind it? What does long-term progress look like? And then, so he had clarity, he had vision, plan, execute. And then also thought, well, hold on, let's talk about data, relevant data. We need to look at any available relevant data to before we plan. It's part of the planning process. Certainly in the military and athletics, there's all sorts of data that we need to know and understand before we do things. And now let's go execute. And then execution creates more data. So let's make sure we store that data. And then let's debrief this thing. So I essentially expanded on this very initial vision, plan, execute piece. And I was sitting in a workshop that I was running, and one of the attendees was asking a question. And he was already a very successful financial planner, and he was offered an opportunity to brand his own wealth management company within the confine or the construct of the mothership investors group. So he said, anybody I've known who has gone on to create their own personal brand, private wealth, they seem to sacrifice family time. And he's a new father, not necessarily newly married, but they've been together for a long time, just married in the last couple of years, but brand new father. And if success, having my own private wealth, means I don't get to see my family, I don't want to do it. And she goes, well, that's just your story. Turns out she was a psychotherapist. I was like, what? Say that again? Story? What's the story you're talking about? And she goes, the story is the thing that you make up to believe to be true. Cold calling's a waste of time. It doesn't work. Story. People will never buy my service on the first conversation. Story. The NDP is going to ruin Alberta. Story. The UCP is going to ruin Alberta. Story. Calgary's the best city to be in business in. Story. True or not, it's still a story. So it's up to the individual to determine, my marriage isn't worth saving. Story, because I know other marriages that have gone through hell and back 3 times and they're still together and they've flourished. So again, it's all story. Mm-hmm. So where my TED Talk finishes is where story begins. And at the TED Talk, I thought story belonged between planning and execution, mostly because I witnessed people resistant to raising prices. And their belief is that if we raise prices, our customers will leave. Well, that's just story. Where's the evidence to support that? So I thought story belonged there, but story is all over that whole thing. There's a story after the result. If the result isn't what we looked for, we defend the bad result with story. We start debriefing and, this was a terrible idea. This was a terrible hotel to work with. Story. No one actually spoke to the catering manager. No one actually spoke to food and beverage to make sure things were on time. So story, whatever. So story belongs everywhere. And that's where, back to that Tony Robbins piece, that if success is 20% strategy, that's everything above that circle. And 80% psychology, that's that whole story narrative. So while strategy is really important, and you cannot win a rugby game without it, the narrative in our head before we even leave the locker room better not be how much are we going to lose this game by. Because that is a bullshit story. The game is lost before we even step on the pitch. And that's the team I used to play for sometimes. My club would behave that way. They don't do that anymore. They seem to always be in the city finals. But we can't leave the locker room thinking we're going to lose before we've even stepped out of the locker room. That's story, and that will kill any opportunity to win. Mm-hmm. Same in business.